Good day, grade 11s. We're on the topic of changing a business plan into an action plan. So in grade 10, you had to write up and draw your own business plan. So what we're going to look at today is how do we take that business plan and make it a real live living thing, an action plan. So let's just recap on what went into a business plan. So remember, a business plan has about 6 different components. Firstly, there's what we call an executive summary or a description of the business. Then you need to have a financial plan, where you were going to get your capital from. Were you going to borrow it, or was it going to be your own capital? What your forecasts were. Then you needed to do a SWOT analysis in terms of what are the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities and threats of your business compared to your competitors. Very important that a marketing plan existed, showing how much you were going to spend, who you were going to market your products to, and what your actual advertising campaign was going to look like. The next thing in a business plan is the management plan. In other words, what is the structure of the business? Who's going to be the CEO? How many people are you going to employ? And then the operational plan looked at the operating, the running of the business, where it would take place, how many, if it was a factory, how many machineries you'd need to import, where you're going to buy locally. And all of this takes a lot of thinking and a lot of time to get right. So the first stage in conceptualizing business ideas is to organize it into a proper and well-constructed business plan. The information in the business plan then needs to be put into action. Once the business plan has been written, the ideas and concepts are now more concrete, but they have to be converted into an action plan. So this is the second stage of this whole planning process. But before we put it into an action plan, we've got to break up all of these sections into something that we call a work breakdown structure. A work breakdown structure is often just abbreviated with the words WBS. So it's the first step in dividing the business plan into smaller little projects so that it's doable and manageable. Right, so what a work breakdown structure does is it divides all the little jobs into smaller levels, and it gives a lot more detail about these smaller tasks. So it's almost like it creates its own hierarchy of how things need to take place. The work, or WBS, also forms a basis for the next steps of planning and developing an action plan. Because once you've put all these tasks into smaller little manageable bite sizes, you're able to then implement them a lot easier. So let's move on now to the steps needed. So when one is designing the work breakdown structure, there are 4 steps that you've got to think about. So remember, it's just making them into small bite-sized pieces with a lot more detail. So you've got to identify the key tasks, the important tasks. So it would be, according to the business plan, the marketing plan, the financial plan. Then you've got to subdivide the task into secondary tasks. Okay, so in the financial plan, there's definitely going to be a sense of what are my sales going to look like, what are my operating expenses going to be, and you're breaking those 2 key tasks into secondary tasks. Once you've broken down the secondary task, you start providing more details. So you start being a little bit more specific about the things that you need. So when we're talking about sales, you might have one of your more details is you want a 6-month sales forecast, and then you want a 1-month sales forecast. So you're providing more details. And then the last step is to check that the breakdown of all this work in this hierarchical format is really logical and it makes sense in sequences. From the work breakdown structure, you are now going to have to put it into what we call an action plan chart. So an action plan, you start taking that information that you've written in the WBS, and you have to ask yourself these questions. Is there a clear objective? And number 1 normally is, yes, we want to start our business. So you must know where you're going. The second thing is, are you defining the steps to get there? Are all these things that you've put in your work breakdown schedule practical? You also need to start prioritizing. So in other words, what must be done first? It's not necessary to go and draw a logo if you don't even know where your premises are going to be. So you have to prioritize the order in which you are doing things. The next one is to identify the endpoint. So in other words, you want to be able to measure things by a certain time. So I've put the word time in here, all right? It's quite important that there's a start and a finish to something so that it is measurable. You have to arrange the steps. Although you've prioritized them, you prioritize them in a logical order. So sequencing has got to take place in your action plan. You also need to be a little bit aware of possible challenges that you could encounter while you're putting this action plan into place. So you need to be proactive about things that you think could be a problem. Then you've got to review the whole process. You've got to look at, are your priorities right? Have you got things in a logical system? Because there's a lot of information and a lot of detail that you've put into this action plan, and you might need to move some things around. It's also quite important with an action plan to identify certain indicators or what we call milestones, okay? So have I finally completed my marketing campaign? Do I know who's going to be in charge of that and by when they are going to be in charge of that? So I hope that this video has helped. We've looked at the business plan, we've looked at the work breakdown structure, and then we've looked at the action plan. The next video is going to talk about timelines, and then the third one is on the Gantt chart. Have a good day.